Lesson 2-5, we're going to talk about properties of the four arithmetic operations. Properties basically are habits that they have, rules that they have. We'll talk about them in detail. This is something you're going to have to memorize. It is a guarantee that you will have at least one, if not two or three questions on the integrated algebra regents next year regarding this particular topic. There are a lot of these things you have seen before. We will review them. There are a couple of properties you haven't seen before, so we will discuss them in length. First of all, what is a property? It's a rule that's made because the numbers with a particular operation act a certain way. Their behavior happens because of certain things that go on. And not something you have to write in your notes, but again, this is really something that you have to memorize. It's a guarantee that these questions will be on the Regents exam next year. I've always recommended writing each property an example 5 to 10 times over the next couple of days and such to help yourself memorize. Tomorrow in class, on the 21st, we're going to make a chart with examples from numbers, variables, and symbols. And hopefully that'll help you as well in your study habits. Let's discuss the first property known as the commutative property. The commutative property means that we can switch the numbers, the placement of the numbers, and we get the same answer. For example, if we have 2 plus 4, that's equal to 6, and so is 4 plus 2. It doesn't matter the order that I say 2 and 4. When we're adding them together, we're always going to get 6. A key note with this particular property is that it only works with addition and multiplication. It does not work with subtraction and division. Don't believe me? Try it out for yourself. The next property is called the associative property. I think about this one because your associates are people that you group yourselves with, that you hang out with, etc. It means that we can group the numbers differently and still get the same answer. Notice that when I put the example up here with multiplication, 2 times the quantity 4 times 2 is the same as the quantity 2 times 4, all of that times 2. They both equal 16. Notice that the order of the numbers stays the same. It's 2, 4, and 2 each time. What changes is the location of the parentheses. That's important to remember. So we're grouping the numbers differently. Basically what we're doing is we're assigning the parentheses to a different part of the problem, and that allows us to do PEMDAS on a different level. Remember, we have to take care of parentheses first before anything. And again, this only works with addition and multiplication. If you try it with subtraction and division, you won't get it. If you don't believe me, try it out for yourself. The distributive property is one that only works with multiplication. The distributive property means that we can take what is outside the parentheses and multiply by each part inside the parentheses. That is what we have to do. I relate this to being like a mailman. The mailman is what's outside the parentheses. You can see in our example here that the 4 would act as the mailman here. The 2 and the 1 are neighbors. They're in the same neighborhood. What I always like to say is if the mailman doesn't deliver to everyone in the neighborhood, he's going to get fired. He's going to have it wrong. He needs to deliver to everyone in the neighborhood. So many times people sit there and they just multiply the 4 by the 2 instead of multiplying it by both the 4, multiplying the 4 by both the 2 and the 1. Hopefully that's a way you can remember it. Mailman delivering to everyone in the neighborhood. The next one is the identity property. The identity property means that when we perform an operation on a number, we get the same number in return. Identity. It's identical. One side is identical to the other. Here we talk about the example 4 plus 0. Obviously, when we add 0 or subtract 0 from anything, we get the same thing. In fact, we call 0 the additive identity element, because anytime that we add 0 or subtract 0 for that matter, we will always get the same thing. While I'm saying this, are you thinking about what the multiplicative identity would be? Or the division identity? What are you thinking that would be? Hopefully you've come up with the fact that 1 is the identity element for multiplication and division. Anything times 1 is itself, anything divided by 1 is itself. So 1 is the identity element for multiplication and division. The inverse property is one of those that a lot of people haven't seen. It gets to be a little difficult. The inverse property means to perform an operation to a number, and our answer has to be the identity element. For example, what we have here, the additive identity, which is 0. We want that to be our answer in this case. So if I'm given 4, how do I get back to 0? Well, I add negative 4. In this case, that's the opposite of the number. The inverse is the opposite of the number. In multiplication, it's a little bit different. Multiplication, the inverse is the reciprocal of the number. If you need to remember it as refliprical, do so. Remember, reciprocal is to flip the fraction. So make the number into a fraction and flip it. That will be the inverse. The 0 property only applies to multiplication. And this is something you've known since you started doing multiplication. Anything times 0 is equal to 0. When multiplying any number by 0, the answer will always be 0. Example, take any number you want. I got 1,234,567 times 0 equals 0. Remember, that only applies to multiplication. So I'm going to put up a bunch of different examples here. And my question to you is, can you name the properties that are illustrated here? Pause the video at this point to give yourself a chance to name the properties. Here are your answers to the last slide. If you have any questions regarding each of the properties, please bring them to one of us in class. Your homework is on textbook page 53. Number 3, we want you to do parts A through F, and we want you to do numbers 4 through 13 all. Remember that your test has been moved to next Friday, September 28th.